Good morrow, scholars. Welcome back to Star Wars. The Empire Strikes Back. Like 6 words in and I mess up. Not a good sign. We are in Chapter 3, page 286. R2-D2 stood just outside the entrance to the street. Secret Rebel ice hangar, dusted with a layer of snow that had settled over his plug-shaped body. His inner timing mechanisms knew he had waited here a long time, and his optical sensors told him that the sky was dark. But the R2 unit was concerned only with his built-in probe sensors that were still sending signals across the ice fields. His long and earnest sensor search for the missing Luke Skywalker and Han Solo had not turned up a thing. The stout droid began beeping nervously when 3PO approached him, plodding stiffly through the snow. R2, the golden-colored robot inclined the upper half of his form at the hip joints. There's nothing more you can do. You must come inside. 3PO straightened it to his full height again, simulating a human shiver as the night winds howled past his gleaming hull. R2, my joints are freezing up. Will you hurry, please? But before he could finish his own sentence, 3PO was hurrying back toward the hangar entrance. Hoth's sky was entirely black with night, and Princess Leia Organa stood inside the Rebel base entrance, maintaining a worried vigil. She shivered in the night wind as she tried to see into the Hoth darkness. Waiting near a deeply concerned Major Durlin, her mind was somewhere out on the ice fields. The giant Wookiee sat nearby, his maned head lifting quickly from his hairy hands as the two droids, 3PO and R2, re-entered the hangar. 3PO was humanely distraught. R2 has not been able to pick up any signals, he reported, fretting, although he feels his range is probably too limited to cause us to give up hope. Still, very little confidence could be detected in 3PO's artificial voice. Leia gave the taller droid a nod of acknowledgement, but did not speak. Her thoughts were occupied with the pair of missing heroes. Most disturbing to her was that she found her mind focused on one of the two, a dark-haired Corellian whose words were not always to be taken literally. As the princess kept watch, Major Durlin turned to acknowledge a rebel lieutenant reporting in. All patrols are now in except for Solo and Skywalker, sir. The major looked over at Princess Leia. Your Highness, he said, his voice weighty with regret. Nothing more can be done tonight. The temperature is dropping fast. The shield doors must be closed. I'm sorry. Durlin waited a moment, then addressed the lieutenant. Close the doors. The rebel officer turned to carry out Durlin's order, and immediately the chamber of ice seemed to drop even more in temperature as the mournful Wookiee howled his grief. The speeder should be ready in the morning, the major said to Leia. They'll make the search easier. Not really expecting an affirmative reply, Leia asked, Is there any chance of their surviving until morning? Slim, Major Durlin answered with grim honesty, but yes, there is a chance. In response to the Major's words, R2 began to operate the miniature computer inside his barrel-like metal body, taking only moments to juggle numerous sets of mathematical computations and climaxing his figures with a series of triumphant beeps. Ma'am? 3PO interrupted. R2 says the chances against survival are 725 to 1. Then tilting forward, the shorter robot, the protocol droid, grumbled. Actually, I don't think we need to know that. No one responded to 3PO's translation. For several prolonged moments, there was a solemn silence broken only by the echoing clang of metal slamming against metal. The huge doors of the rebel base were closed for the night. It was as if some heartless deity had officially severed the assembled group from the two men out on the ice plains and had, with a metallic bang, announced their deaths. Oh, that's sad. Chewbacca let out another suffering howl. I don't like to see Chewbacca sad. And a silent prayer, often spoken on an erstwhile world called Alderaan, crept into Leia's thoughts. The sun that was creeping over Hoth's northern horizon was relatively dim, but its light was enough to shed some warmth on the planet's icy surface. The light crawled across the rolling hills of snow, fought to reach the darker recesses of the icy gorges. I almost said gouges. then finally came to rest on what must have been the only perfect white mound in the entire world. So perfect was the snow-covered mound that it must have owed its existence to some power other than nature. Then, as the sky grew steadily brighter, this mound began to hum. Anyone observing the mound now would have been startled, as the snow dome seemed to erupt, sending its snowy outer covering skyward in a great burst of white particles. A droning machine began pulling back its retractable sensor arms, and its awesome bulk slowly rose from its frozen white bed. The probe robot paused briefly in the windy air, then continued on its morning mission across the snow-covered plains. Something else had invaded the morning air of the ice world, a relatively small snub-nosed craft with dark cockpit windows and laser guns mounted on each side. The rebel snowspeeder was heavily armored and designed for warfare near the planet's surface, but this morning the small craft was on a reconnaissance mission, racing above the expansive white landscape and arching over the contours of the snowdrifts. Although the snowspeeder was designed for a two-man crew, Zev, the ship's only occupant, or Zev was the ship's only occupant. I'm stupid. Sorry. His eyes took in a panoramic scan of the desolate stretches below, and he prayed that he would find the objects of his search before he went snowblind. Presently he had heard a low beeping signal. Echo base, and he shouted jubilantly into his cockpit comlink. I've got something, not much, but it could be a sign of life. Sector 4614 by 882. I'm closing in. Frantically working the controls of a ship, Zev reduced its speed slightly and banked the craft over a snowdrift. He welcomed the sudden G-force pressing him against his seat and headed the snowspeeder in the direction of the faint signal. As the white infinity of Hoth's terrain streaked under him, the rebel pilot switched his comlink to a new frequency. Echo 3, this is Rogue 2. Do you copy, Commander Skywalker? This is Rogue 2. The only reply that came through his comlink receiver was static, but then he heard a voice, a very distant-sounding voice, fighting its way through the crackling noise. Nice of you guys to drop by. I hope we didn't get you up too early. Zev welcomed the characteristic cynicism in Han Solo's voice. He switched his transmitter back to the hidden rebel base. Echo base, this is Rogue 2, he reported, his voice suddenly rising in pitch. I found them. Repeat. As he spoke, the pilot pulled in a fine-tuned fix on the signals, winking on his cockpit monitor screens. Then he further reduced the speed of his craft, bringing it down close enough to the planet's surface so that he could better see a small object standing out against the fleecy plains. The object, a portable Rebel-issue shelter, sat atop a snowdrift. On the shelter's windward side was a hard-packed layer of white, and resting gingerly against the upper part of the snowdrift was a makeshift radio antenna. But a more welcome sight than any of this was the familiar human figure standing in front of the snow shelter, frantically waving his arms at the snowspeeder. As Zeb dipped his craft for a landing, he felt overwhelmingly grateful that at least one of the warriors he had been sent out to find was still alive. Only a thick glass window separated the battered, near-frozen body of Luke Skywalker from 5 of his watchful friends. Han Solo, who appreciated the relative warmth of the Rebel Medical Center, was standing beside Leia, his Wookiee co-pilot, R2-D2, and C-3PO. Han exhaled with relief. He knew that despite the grim atmosphere of the chamber enclosing him, the young commander was finally out of danger and in the best of mechanical hands. Clad only in white shorts, Luke hung in a vertical position inside a transparent cylinder with a combination breath mask and microphone covering his nose and mouth. The surgeon droid, 21B, was attending to the youth with the skill of the finest humanoid doctors. He was aided by his medical assistant droid FX7, which looked like nothing more than a metal-capped set of cylinders, wires, and appendages. Gracefully, the surgeon droid worked a switch that brought gelatinous red fluid pouring down over his human patient. This Bacta, I don't know how you would prefer to pronounce it, but, whatever. Hanu could work miracles even with patients in such dire shape as Luke. As the bubbling, think of like the one fluid chamber in Dragon Ball Z that they put Goku in. You remember. As the bubbling slime encapsulated his body, Luke began to thrash about and rave deliriously. "Watch out," he moaned. "Snow creatures. Dangerous. Yoda. Go to Yoda. Only hope." Han had not the slightest idea what his friend was raving about. Chewbacca, also perplexed by the youth's babbling, expressed himself with an interrogative Wookiee bark. "It doesn't make sense to me either, Chewie," Han replied. 3PO commented hopefully, "I do hope he's alright there, if you take my meaning. It would be most unfortunate if Master Luke were to develop a short circuit." "The kid ran into something," Han observed matter-of-factly, "and it wasn't just the cold." "It's those creatures he keeps talking about," Leia said, looking at the grimly staring Solo. "We've doubled security, Han," she began, tentatively trying to thank him. "I don't know how." "Forget it," he said briskly. Right now he was concerned only with his friend and the red Bacta fluid. Bacta? I don't care anymore. Luke's body sloshed through the brightly colored substance, the Bacta's healing properties by now taking effect. For a while it appeared as if Luke were trying to resist the curative flow of the translucent muck. Then at last he gave up his mumbling and relaxed, succumbing to the Bacta's powers. 2-1B turned away from the human who had been entrusted to his care. He angled his skull-shaped head to gaze at Han and the others through the window. "Commander Skywalker has been in Dormo shock, but is responding well to the Bacta," the robot announced, his commanding, authoritative voice heard distinctly through the glass. "He is now out of danger." The surgeon robot's words immediately wiped away the tension that had seized the group on the other side of the window. Leia sighed in relief, and Chewbacca grunted his approval of 2-1B's treatment. Luke had no way of estimating how long he had been delirious, but now he was in full command of his mind and senses. He sat up on his bed in the Rebel Medical Center. What a relief, he thought, to be breathing real air again, however cold it might be. The medical droid was removing the protective pad from his healing face. His eyes were uncovered, and he was beginning to perceive the face of someone standing by his bed. Gradually, the smiling image of Princess Leia came into focus. She gracefully moved toward him and gently brushed his hair out of his eyes. "The Bacta are growing well," she said, as she looked at his healing wounds. "The scars should be gone in a day or so. Does it still hurt you?" Across the room, the door banged open. R2 beeped a cheerful greeting as he rolled toward Luke, and 3PO clanked noisily toward Luke's bed. "Master Luke, it's good to see you functional again." "Thanks, 3PO." R2 emitted a series of happy beeps and whistles. "R2 expresses his relief also," 3PO translated helpfully. Luke was certainly grateful for the robot's concern, but before he could reply to either of the droids, he met with yet another interruption. "Hi, kid." Han Solo greeted him boisterously as he and Chewbacca burst into the medical center. The Wookiee growled a friendly greeting. I like the sound of that. "You look strong enough to wrestle a Gundark," Han observed. Luke felt that strong and felt grateful to his friend. "Thanks to you." "That's two, Yomi, Jr." Han gave the princess a wide, devilish grin. "Well, your worship," he said mockingly, "it looks like you arranged to keep me close by for a little while longer." "I had nothing to do with it," Leia said hotly, annoyed at Han's vanity. "General Riken thinks it's dangerous for any ships to leave the system until the generators are operational. That makes a good story, but I think you just can't bear to let me out of your sight." "Oh, geez. I don't know where you get your delusions, laser brains," she retorted. Chewbacca, amused by this verbal battle between two of the strongest human wills he had ever encountered, let out a roaring Wookiee laugh. "Yeah. Laugh it up, fuzzball," Han said good-naturedly. "You didn't see us alone in the South Passage." Okay, now here's the weird thing. You see me go like that? There's something called an aside glance. It's a trope. The thing is, the reason I do that is because on TV people do that, like say you're a person. I'm talking to the mic, or not the microphone, the webcam. Say this webcam is a person. I'm looking this way, as if the camera's over here filming us. I look over here knowing there's no camera from the camera that I was looking at. Anyway. I'm weird. Until now, Luke had scarcely listened to this lively exchange. Han and the princess had argued frequently enough in the past. But that reference to the South Passage sparked his curiosity, and he looked at Leia for an explanation. She expressed her true feeling for me, Han continued, delighting in the rosy flush that appeared on the princess's cheeks. Come on, Your Highness, have you already forgotten? Why, you low-down, stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerve-herder, she sputtered in fury. Who's scruffy-looking? One of my favorite exchanges in the entire series. He grinned. I'll tell you, sweetheart, I must have hit pretty close to the mark to get you hopping like this. Doesn't it look that way to you, Luke? Yeah, he said, staring at the princess incredulously. It does. Kind of. Leia looked over at Luke with a strange mixture of emotions showing on her flushed face. Something vulnerable, almost childlike, was reflected in her eyes for a moment, and then the tough mask fell again. Oh, it does it? She said. Well, I guess you don't understand everything about women, do you? Luke agreed silently. He agreed even more when, in the next moment, Leia leaned over and kissed him firmly on the lips. She turned on her heel and marched across the room, slamming the door behind her. Everyone in the room, human, Wookiee, and droid, looked at one another, speechless. In the distance, a warning alarm blared through the subterranean corridors. General Rieken and his head controller were conferring in the Rebel Command Center when Han Solo and Chewbacca burst into the room. Princess Leia and 3PO, who had been listening to the general and his officer, turned in anticipation at their approach. A warning signal blared across the chamber from the huge console located behind Rieken and monitored by Rebel control officers. General, the sensor controller called. Grimly attentive, General Rieken watched the console screens. Suddenly he saw a flashing signal that had not been there a moment before. Princess, he said, I think we have a visitor. Leia, Han, Chewbacca, and 3PO gathered around the general and watched the beeping monitor screens. We've picked up something outside the base in Zone 12. It's moving east, said Rieken. Whatever it is, it's metal, the sensor controller observed. Leia's eyes widened in surprise that it can't be one of those creatures that attacked Luke. Could it be ours, Han asked, a speeder? The sensor controller shook his head. No, there's no signal. Then came a sound from another monitor. Wait, something very weak. Walking as rapidly as his stiff joints allowed, 3PO approached the console, his auditory sensors tuned in the strange signals. I must say, sir, I'm fluent in over 6 million forms of communication, but this is something new. Must be in code, or... Just then, the voice of a rebel trooper cut in through the console's comm-leak speaker. This is Echo Station 3-8. Unidentified object is in our scope. It's just over the ridge. We should have a visual contact in about... Without warning, the voice filled with fear. What the... Oh no! A burst of radio static followed, then the transmission broke off completely. Han frowned. Whatever it is, he said, it isn't friendly. Let's have a look. Come on, Chewie. Even before Han and Chewbacca were out of the chamber, General Rieken had dispatched rogues 10 and 11 to Station 3-8. The mammoth Imperial Star Destroyer occupied a position of deadly prominence in the Emperor's fleet. The sleekly elongated ship was larger and even more ominous than the 5 wedge-shaped Imperial Star Destroyers guarding it. Together, these 6 cruisers were the most dreaded and devastating warships in the galaxy, capable of reducing to cosmic scrap anything that strayed too close to their weapons. Flanking the Star Destroyers were a number of smaller fighter ships, and darting about this great space armada were the infamous TIE fighters. Supreme confidence reigned in the heart of every crew member in this Imperial Death Squadron, especially among the personnel on the monstrous Central Star Destroyer. But something also blazed within their souls. Fear. Fear of merely the sound of the familiar heavy footsteps as they echoed through the enormous ship. Crew members dreaded those footfalls and shuddered whenever they were heard approaching, bringing their much feared but much respected leader. Towering above them in his black cloak and concealing black headgear, Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, entered the main control deck, and the men around him fell silent. In what seemed to be an endless moment, no sounds except those from the ship's control boards and loud wheezes coming from the ebony figure's metal breath screen were to be heard. As Darth Vader watched the endless array of stars, Captain Piet rushed across the wide bridge of the ship, carrying a message for the squat, evil-looking Admiral Ozzel, who was stationed on the bridge. I think we found something, Admiral. he announced nervously, looking from Ozzel to the Dark Lord. Yes, Captain, the Admiral was a supremely confident man who felt relaxed in the presence of his cloaked superior. The report we have is only a fragment from a probe droid in the Hoth system, but it's the best lead we've had in. We have thousands of probe droids searching the galaxy, Ozzel broke in angrily. I want proof, not leads. I do not intend to continue to chase around from one side of... Abruptly, the figure in black approached the two and interrupted. You found something? He asked, his voice somewhat distorted by the breath mask. Captain Piet respectfully gazed at his master, who loomed above him like a black-robed, omnipotent god. Yes, sir, Piet said slowly, choosing his words with caution. We have visuals. The system is supposed to be devoid of human forms. But Vader was no longer listening to the captain. His masked face turned toward the image beamed on one of the view screens, an image of a small squadron of rebel snowspeeders streaking above the white fields. That's it, Darth Vader boomed without further deliberation. My lord, Admiral Ozzel protested, there are so many uncharted settlements, this could be smugglers. That is the one, the former Jedi Knight insisted, clenching a black-gloved fist. And Skywalkers with them. Bring in the patrol ships, Admiral, and set your course for the Hoth system. Vader looked toward an officer wearing a green uniform with matching cap. General Veers, the Dark Lord addressed him, prepare your men. As soon as Darth Vader had spoken, his men set about to launch his fearful plan. The Imperial probe droid raised a large antenna from its bug-like head and sent out a piercing high-frequency signal. The robot scanners had reacted to a lifeform hidden behind a great dune of snow and noted the appearance of a brown Wookiee head and the sound of a deep-throated growl. The blasters that had been built into the probe robot took aim at the furry giant, but before the robot had a chance to fire, a red beam from a hand blaster exploded from behind the Imperial probe droid and nicked its darkly finished hull. As he ducked behind a large dune, Han Solo noticed Chewbacca still hidden, and then watched as the robot spun around in midair to face him. So far the ruse was working, and now he was the target. Han had barely moved out of range as the floating machine fired, blasting chunks of snow from the edge of his dune. He fired again, hitting it square on with the beam of his weapon. Then he heard a high-pitched whine coming from the deadly machine, and in an instant the Imperial probe droid burst into 1 billion or more flaming pieces. I'm afraid there's not much left, Han said over the comlink as he concluded his report to the underground base. Princess Leia and General Riken were still manning the console where they had maintained, I don't know what's wrong today, constant communication with Han. What is it? Leia asked. Droid of some kind, he answered, but I didn't hit it that hard. It must have self-destruct. Did. I don't know. Leia paused as she considered this unwelcome piece of information. An Imperial droid, she said, betraying some trepidation. If it was, Han warned, the Empire surely knows we're here. General Riken shook his head slowly. We'd better start to evacuate the planet. Okay, that was Chapter 3. A little bit longer than I thought. I think a lot of it had to do with me being stupid. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I'm sure by this point some of you have noticed I'm only uploading 1 video a day. Now, a part of that is because I'm very tired from work, and I'm waking up late, and I just don't have enough time to have 2 videos a day, get dressed for work, or I guess get ready for work, because, you know, shower, all that other stuff, and then walk to work. But as soon as I get my car situation set up, I'll be back on schedule properly this time. I guess I could just make little short videos out of the stuff that I have on my camera. Oh well, it doesn't matter. Anywho, until next time, bye everybody.